Welcome back, guys. It's time for another demo. So a minute ago, I've mentioned that I was going to do a demo about RAID 5 and RAID 6. And also I was going to do a demo about trim and map. So let's start with RAID 5 and RAID 6. In this class, you started with two clusters. And if you remember, you already had a RAID 5 VM. So let's take a look at this RAID 5 virtual machine. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to physical disk placement. If this VM has one disk, if this VM is running, I expect to have three different objects. Notice, you're talking about the hard disk, the VM home namespace object, and the swap object. All three of them in this case are RAID 5. Remember, RAID 5 requires 4 hosts because again, you have 4 components spread throughout 4 hosts. This obviously is what you want to see. Everything active. Now let's go create a policy for RAID 6. Now remember, I cannot use RAID 6, but I can definitely create the policy. So I am going to go to the home page. I'm going to click on the icon for virtual machine storage policies, and I am going to click on create. I am going to give the policy a name. I'm going to click on next, and I am going to click on the checkbox for vSAN. I've mentioned it's a lot easier than it used to be to create these policies. If you ever compare the way we do it with the vSphere client with, let's say, the web client a few years back, night and day difference. The naming convention is a lot easier in the vSphere client. So I am going to choose the option for RAID 6. And if you take a look, I choose RAID 6. Notice it says, hey, if your VM is 100 gigs, you will need 150 gigs instead of a 3-way mirror, which would be 300 gigs. And I click on next. And here you can see I don't have any data stores which are compatible. Now here you can see my vSAN data store is incompatible. Why? Once again, I don't have enough hosts. Now, if I don't know what that means, I create the policy and then I try to use it. Now let's see what happens when I try to use it. I am going to go to my cluster. I am going to try, notice I use the word try. I'm going to try to create a virtual machine. Now, as I go through the wizard, I'm going to choose one of my clusters. And I am going to choose my RAID 6 policy. Once again, it tells me it's incompatible with everything. Okay, let's assume I don't know what that means. I choose my vSAN data store. I get this warning. Once again, if I try to proceed, what's going to happen here is, notice, I try to create the VM, and I expect a pop-up window on the bottom right. Now notice, this message is fairly generic. It says it failed. But if I look right here under recent tasks, the system is telling me you don't have at least 6 full domains. Remember, that means either 6 implicit full domains, that means 6 hosts, or 6 groupings of hosts. Remember again, full domains are used, I'm talking about explicit full domains are used to make vSAN rack aware. So here I only have 4 hosts. All right, so now let's do another demo. And what we're going to do now is we are going to play with trim and map. I'm going to show you how to use the RVC. So the first thing you would need to do is you would need to putty into the vCenter server as root. So here in class, all you have to do is click on the entry for the vCenter server. You can see I'm logged in as root. Now remember, you can enable or disable SSH for the vCenter, for example, from the VAMI port. Next, I'm going to type shell. And now I'm going to type RVC administrator at vsphere.local at local host. All right. What's going to happen next is I'm going to be asked for my password. Now, if you never use the RVC, you can see a few entries. And when you see entries with a slash at the end, I want you to think of those as folders. Now with the RVC, you could use commands like cd and ls to navigate through the RVC and take a look at the contents of each of these, in quotes, folders. So I am going to change into localhost. Notice I could use the name or the shortcut, the number to the left. Notice I'm using number 1, which is, again, the shortcut for localhost. I type ls. Notice I don't have ls minus L, but I have ls. This shows me I have a data center called SA data center. If I type vSAN tab, this will show me all the commands that start with vSAN. If you take a look, among these commands, you have the command for trim and map. Now, if you take a look, you can't just run that command as is. Now notice, if I try to enable trim and map, if I don't put a cluster name, it's going to tell me, you need to tell me which cluster you're talking about. Now, what I need to do here is I need to be able to point to one of my clusters. So how do I do that? One easy way is to navigate onto the folder where you find the different clusters. Here you can see I just access my data center. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to go to the folder for computers. I type ls. And by the way, notice if you try commands like clear, that's not going to work. But a nice little shortcut is Control L. Control L will clear your screen. A friend of mine showed me that after years of working with the RVC. I didn't know about that. So having said that, here you can see my 2 clusters. Let's take a look at what happens if I try to enable trim and map on one of those clusters. I am going to try to enable this on my first cluster. Remember, you could use the number or the name of the cluster. The number would be 0 in this case. Remember, if this is already enabled, the symbol will tell me that. If it's not enabled, it will enable it. And then at that point, it's going to tell me to power cycle the VMs. You can see, if it's already enabled, which it is in my first cluster, it tells me, no, been there, done that. It's already enabled. Now let's do it on the second cluster. I am going to choose this time around the entry number 1. Remember, that is the one for my second cluster. I have not enabled trim and map on this cluster. So let's see what happens. Once again, I say, let's enable trim and map on this particular cluster. And you can see this will take about a minute, not even. It runs this command. And again, as soon as it finishes, it will tell me that it's time to power cycle the VMs. A few more seconds. Let's see what happens. There it is. Done. You can see it says success. And you can see it says virtual machines need to be power cycled to apply the nmap setting. Well, guys, hopefully you enjoyed that demo, and I'll see you in our next chapter. Thank you, and enjoy the break.